I want to move on now to our next big newsmaker who's joining us. And remember, America has taken a very strident position on this. President Biden has spoken with Netanyahu. He's in fact pledged his steadfast support for Israel and Israel's right to self-defense. But this is now, the net of this is spreading wider. Ambassador John Bolton is former US National Security Advisor under the Trump administration. He's now joining me from Washington, D.C. We've all seen the dastardly terror attacks that happened in Israel on Saturday, carried out by Hamas operatives. But now Israel is launching a major counteroffensive by way of air and also major mobilization on ground. What would you say to those people who say that Israel runs the risk of its counteroffensive, of its response being disproportionate?
Well, I think any state, any people have a right to live in peace and security. They have a right to be free from aggression and free from terrorism. And when they are threatened, they are entitled to take steps in self-defense. They are not required to respond only proportionately. They are allowed to eliminate the threat. And if that's what Israel is going to do, I think that's entirely permissible.
How do you then distinguish between who are the Hamas operatives and the Hamas leadership who need to be eliminated? Surely Israel is justified in that after what we saw on Saturday. But how do you distinguish them from who the civilians in Gaza are? Because surely even Israel knows you can't just eliminate 2 million people.
Well, the Israelis were clearly the victims of a terrorist attack, and they are now going to retaliate. The fact that the Hamas terrorists cut off the heads of babies as part of their terror operation shows just how barbaric they are. But you know what else shows barbarism? To use your own women and children and hostages as human shields. So what Hamas is doing in trying to protect itself in the Gaza Strip is simply a different form of barbarism. You cannot equate the victims of terrorism with the terrorists themselves.
You have said, Ambassador, repeatedly on Twitter in the last couple of days that you are convinced that the people who are backing Hamas to do what they did was the Iranian regime. On what basis have you come to that conclusion? Because now there are official denials from Iran. Israel's also not come to that conclusion that Iran was backing Hamas in doing what it did. So on what basis did you come to that conclusion?
Look, there is no doubt. I know of no one other than Hamas and Iran that would deny that the overwhelming bulk of the missile capabilities that Hamas has launched against Israel, many of their more sophisticated efforts through hang gliders and the like, cyber attacks, also came from Iran. And there's also no doubt that there were consultations between Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah before the war began. This is clear that Iran did not give all these capabilities to Hamas for Hamas to use at a time of its choosing. Iran gave these capabilities for Hamas to use at a time of its choosing, which it has now done. And I think this is part and parcel of a well-known Iranian strategy of putting what was called a ring of fire around Israel, leading to its destruction. And I think Iran should pay a price here. Hamas was just the gun. Iran pulled the trigger.
But what may that price be, Ambassador Bolton? Because what you are suggesting would inevitably need or inevitably descend into some kind of a wider regional conflict. It could involve Iran, perhaps Turkey, Syria, Hezbollah, and of course Hamas. So how do you guard against that?
Well, when you say lead to a wider conflict, it already is a wider conflict. Iran and Hamas attacked Israel. So is Israel now to be restricted in the exercise of its own self-defense from not attacking Iran? let me tell you, when people say somehow Israel has to do less than is necessary to eliminate the threat that it faces, that's simply not realistic. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, the United States did not respond proportionally. And I think we were exactly right to do that. And I think Israel is exactly right to take steps and following the doctrines that it has instilled in its military, as the United States has instilled in ours about how to fight wars, that they should go as far as they need to go to eliminate the threat.
In the weeks leading up to this attack, there was a lot of chatter, a lot of hope, one would say, about normalization of ties between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Given what happened on Saturday, there is a sense that Israel's normalization of its ties with its Arab neighbors, this is going to throw a huge spanner in those works. What happens to that process? What does this attack do to that normalization process?
Well, I think it certainly impairs the normalization process. And I think this is because one of the threats that Iran poses is not simply to the little Satan, Israel, or the great Satan, the United States. It threatens its Sunni Arab neighbors. And the irony here, of course, is that Hamas is primarily composed of Sunni Palestinians who are bought and paid for by Iran. That is causing turmoil in the Sunni Arab world. This is part of the struggle between Shia Iran and the Gulf Arab states for dominance inside Islam. So Iran is playing a broad strategic game here. And to focus only on what Hamas did to Israel misses the big picture entirely. And I think it's the big strategic picture that Bibi Netanyahu will focus on.
What happens to all the new mechanisms, the new partnerships that have come into being in the Middle East in the last few years? We have this I2U2 partnership, that's Israel, India, US, and UAE. Recently at the G20, there was the announcement of the new corridor, the IMEC, India, Middle East, Europe corridor, in which both Saudi Arabia and Israel were supposed to be partners. What happens to all of that? Does all of this come to a halt now?
No, I don't think so. I think if you look at statements by the United Arab Emirates, for example, very supportive of Israel and its response. Saudis and others, not so much. But the natural strategic affinity that has drawn Israel and the Gulf Arabs together will continue after this attack. And I think these projects and the linkage of India, the Middle East, and Europe will proceed. Delayed, perhaps, but not stopped.
What's the way forward then, politically speaking? Yes, militarily, Israel will take whatever action it deems fit to secure its citizens, to secure its own safety. But ultimately, beyond the military action, how is this story moving politically?
Well, I think it depends in part on Iran. We don't know what the full Iranian strategy is. We know that the Hamas attack was launched almost to the day on the anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, which was an assault on Israel that caught Israel badly unprepared. They didn't see it coming. Israel didn't see this attack coming. So I think it's important to see what other threats emerge, whether threats emerge beyond Israel, whether they emerge in the United States or Europe, for example. I think we are only in the opening days of this. So trying to see the fuller political ramifications, I think at this point is nearly impossible.
So talking about the United States, what do you make of the Biden administration's response so far to this attack, both in word and in deed? They seem to be backing Israel to the hilt.
Well, I think they have taken some steps. They're sending the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier battle group, the Gerald Ford, the largest carrier in the American fleet, to the Eastern Mediterranean. That has a capability of providing air cover for Israel to free up Israeli planes to go after attacking terrorist or Iranian forces. I think we could do more. I think there are going to be a lot of supplies we can provide Israel. I think what Biden really needs to do is make a major speech to announce American support for Israel and to say we hope our friends and allies do the same.
And finally, Ambassador, does this take away attention and time money and all the support that Ukraine has got from the West and from America in particular in its own war against Russia?
Well, it's Russia's war against Ukraine. Russia's the country that launched the war. I worry that it does. I think realistically, you have to be concerned. But those of us who support the Ukrainians and who support Israel, I think, have an obligation now to explain why we need to do whatever we can in both situations. But I will simply point out that when you add Ukraine, Israel, potential fighting between Serbia and Kosovo, the recent Azerbaijan takeover of the Nagorno-Karabakh enclave claimed by Armenia, threats by China all along its periphery, including India's northern border. The world's becoming deeply unstable. I think this requires a much stronger United States, and we're going to have a presidential election where this issue of America's role in the world is going to be very important.
All right. Thank you very much for your thoughts and your perspective, Ambassador John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor of the United States. Thank you for speaking with us here on Brass Tacks.